Breaking news, Philadelphia sheriff calling ICE agents fake wannabe law enforcement and warning, quote, "You don't want this smoke." And her comments are generating a lot of headlines and some outrage. One Republican is now calling for her arrest. Well, let's tell you exactly what she said. Here's more from Sheriff Rochelle Bilal.
I call them made up fake wannabe law enforcement because what they do is against not only legal law, but the moral law. If any of them want to come in this city and commit a crime, you will not be able to hide. Nobody will wish you off. You don't want this smoke because we will bring it to you. The criminal in the White House would not be able to keep you from going to jail.
And she is out front now, the sheriff for the city and county of Philadelphia, Rochelle Bilal. And Sheriff, I am grateful for your time tonight. So obviously you used those words knowing full well they would be heard.
All right, friends, John here. So this is happening right now. Philadelphia Sheriff Rochelle Bilal stood in front of cameras and delivered a message with zero ambiguity. If you come to Philadelphia wearing masks, operating outside legal accountability, terrorizing her community, you will be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No hedging, no both sidesism, a declaration of jurisdiction from an elected law enforcement leader who drew a line in concrete.
And you were prepared for them to be heard, as they have been. Why did you feel the need to speak out as a law enforcement officer so passionately against ICE?
First of all, thank you for having me. While attending the DA Krasner press conference on dealing with the situation with Miss Good that happened in Minneapolis, what was stated was that the district attorney said if you're going to come in Philadelphia and commit a crime, that he would arrest you. The sheriff's office, it deals with transportation. So basically I said you would not be able to hide. Nobody will whisk you away. And if he charges you, then you can be arrested. What I was saying is that when I said you come in this city to do a crime, we will bring the smoke to you. People are tired of these people coming into the city masked up, basically all masked up, and pulling people out and causing havoc.
And dared anyone to cross it? In a moment when most officials are trembling at the prospect of a Truth Social post, she demonstrated what courage actually looks like. It should be noted, because the facts always matter, even when we're talking about things that feel purely moral, that under Sheriff Bilal's leadership,
this was supposed to be helping cities out. This was supposed to be eliminating crime, but yet you are committing them here. You are putting people in fear. You are breaking up families.
Is it making your job harder? Is it making your job harder?
It is. Because in Philadelphia, because there are two branches of law enforcement. The Philadelphia Police Department that, does the investigation, arrest, patrol the city. The sheriff's office is the security of the courts. We have K-9, bike unit, warrant unit that works 24 hours out in the streets. And I'm being blamed about ICE agents being around the courts. Now, I can't stop ICE from being outside, hanging around the courts because public sidewalks, public building. But what I can do is if the district attorney arrests you and charge you, then we will make sure we transport you to where you need to go.
And alongside District Attorney Larry Krasner, the city of Philadelphia has seen homicides drop to levels not witnessed in 6 full decades. Think about the weight of that statistic. In an era where certain political figures constantly paint America's cities as war zones that only federal occupation can pacify, Philadelphia under progressive leadership has achieved a historic reduction in violent death.
So let me ask you, because, the video that we've had on this, and I'm sure you've seen it from various angles, we now have a new angle tonight filmed by the actual ICE agent who shot Good himself, right? He filmed their interaction and has released it. Vice President Vance says it shows that the ICE agent, that his life was endangered and he fired in self-defense. You do see them interacting, and it seems to be a rather calm interaction, her arms out the window, then it escalates within milliseconds to the shooting. Looking at this as law enforcement, okay, and what he did and what happened, what do you see?
First of all, law enforcement professional does not put themselves in the place of danger. You don't stand in front of a vehicle, basically standing there so that you can get hit or cause an accident. And then when the woman, and Miss Good, turns to get away from them, and the officer is on the side, where is the threat? There's no more threat for you to shoot twice into a car. There was no gun shooting at you. The car turned you out of the way. That should have been it. 2 more shots into the vehicle, killing this woman. It's wrong.
The actual data, the cold hard numbers that do not care about anyone's ideology, demonstrate that community-focused policing, accountability, and moral clarity work. They save lives. They make neighborhoods safer. They do what the fear-mongering and the paramilitary raids never accomplish. DA Krasner, for his part, has been equally unequivocal. His message aligns perfectly with the sheriff's. The law will be applied equally, the Constitution will be respected within his jurisdiction, and those who come seeking to operate outside those constraints will find themselves on the wrong end of the justice system they thought they were above. This is what governance looks like when it refuses to capitulate to authoritarian pressure. This is what happens when local leaders understand that their oath is to the Constitution and to their communities, not to the whims of a president who views law enforcement as a personal militia. To elevate this conversation to the national stage, Democratic Congresswoman Sydney Kamlager-Dove joined the discussion with the same fire, the same unambiguous moral voice that the moment demands. When asked for her reaction to the videos of ICE agents terrorizing communities, to the sheriff's defiant stance, and to the broader crisis of federal law enforcement being transformed into what she accurately described as Donald Trump's paramilitary groups, the Congresswoman did not hold back a single syllable. Her words were a torrent of righteous indignation and clear-eyed analysis. She began by centering the human tragedy that has become the unavoidable symbol of this crisis: the murder of Renee Good, a United States citizen gunned down in cold blood, an act captured on video that has been seen around the world and that has seared itself into the conscience of the nation. Her heart, she made clear, goes out to the family, to the community that had to watch their loved one be executed on a recording that leaves no room for ambiguity. This was not a chaotic situation where the facts are in dispute. This was a killing perpetrated by an ICE agent who told the victim to get out of the car and then shot her through the window when she attempted to flee. The Congresswoman's focus on the Philadelphia sheriff's message was immediate and visceral. "You do not want this smoke," the sheriff had said, and Kamlager-Dove amplified that sentiment, insisting that this is precisely the energy we need from law enforcement officials nationwide who are seeing their profession's reputation dragged through the mud by what she unflinchingly labeled ICE goons. The core of her argument struck at the foundational rot that has been allowed to fester unchecked. We do not know what training these federal agents have received. We do not know what protocols they are operating under, what rules of engagement they have been given, what standards of conduct are supposedly governing their interactions with the public. The opacity is by design, a feature rather than a bug of a system that wants to operate outside accountability. The vice president has publicly asserted that these agents possess absolute immunity, a claim that is both legally and morally false, but that serves as a permission structure for whatever brutality follows. "They are out in American streets," the Congresswoman stated, "terrorizing and killing our friends and family members, and they are doing so under the protective umbrella of an administration that has signaled that no consequence will ever reach them." The original mandate for ICE, the public justification for its existence, was to target individuals who are in the country without legal status and who are committing criminal acts. That was the deal sold to the American people, focused enforcement against genuine threats. But what we witnessed with Renee Good was the complete inversion of that mandate. She was an American citizen. She was not a threat. She was attempting to disengage, to get away from a confrontation that was escalating dangerously, and the response from the federal agent was to shoot her through a window. That is not de-escalation. That is not due process. That is not a measured application of law enforcement authority. Lethal force, as the Congresswoman articulated with devastating precision, is supposed to be the measure of last resort, the final option when all other avenues have been exhausted and an imminent threat to life is undeniable. What happened on that video is lethal force deployed as a first resort. as an opening move, as a punishment for non-compliance delivered without warning, without trial, without any semblance of the constitutional protections that are supposed to separate a democracy from a dictatorship. The demand she issued was unequivocal, and it must be echoed until it becomes impossible for the power structure to ignore. These individuals, the agents involved, and the leadership that enabled them, need to be investigated not by an internal process designed to exonerate, but by a mechanism with real teeth. They should not be handled by an FBI that operates under the same executive branch whose policies enabled the killing. They should be prosecuted. The Secretary of Homeland Security must resign in disgrace or face impeachment, and the nation must undergo a moral reckoning, a deep and uncomfortable confrontation with the reality of what the man in the White House has done to the concept of law enforcement. He has turned federal agents into paramilitary operatives answering not to the law, but to a political agenda. At the same time, he has taken local law enforcement hostage, forcing them to deal with the wreckage left behind when these federal forces sweep into communities, create mayhem, and then retreat, leaving the local officers to manage the trauma, the anger, and the shattered trust. The communities are left holding the consequences of actions they never authorized, perpetrated by agents they never invited, under orders from a president who views their neighborhoods not as places to protect, but as stages for political theater. And then, as if to confirm every single accusation about his contempt for truth and his disregard for human life, Donald Trump opened his mouth in an interview and demonstrated exactly why this moral reckoning is so urgently necessary. When asked about the murder of Renee Good, a woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time when a federal agent decided her life was forfeit, the President of the United States did not express condolences. He did not call for an investigation. He did not acknowledge the humanity of the woman who was killed. Instead, he fabricated an alternative reality out of whole cloth. He claimed that she behaved horribly, a smear against a dead woman who cannot defend herself. He claimed that she ran him over, referring to the agent, a statement that is demonstrably, provably false based on the video evidence that the entire world can watch. The video does not show anyone being run over. It shows a shooting. It shows an execution. But Trump, as he has done his entire public life, simply invented a version of events that casts his agent as the victim and the dead woman as the aggressor, because facts have never mattered to him, and his followers will believe whatever he says regardless of the evidence. His administration, even before the video was released and the truth was available for anyone to see, had already labeled her a domestic terrorist, had already claimed she weaponized her vehicle, had already constructed the narrative framework that would justify her killing as a righteous act of self-defense. The video's release exposed all of it as a lie, but the lie had already served its purpose. It had already given permission to a certain segment of the population to view the death of an American citizen as acceptable collateral damage in the war on immigration. This is where the Congresswoman's call for a moral reckoning hits with such force, because something profoundly disturbing has happened to the way we process events in this country. So much of politics has been reduced to superficial performance, to personality contests, to the endless hamster wheel of who is running against whom and who is up or down in the polls. We treat it like a game, like a reality show where the stakes are ratings and the losers just go home. But when you step back from the noise, when you strip away the gifs and the memes and the horse race nonsense, what you are left with is a confrontation between good and evil, between those who believe in the inherent dignity of every human being and those who view human life as disposable if it stands in the way of power. The banality of evil, that haunting phrase coined to describe the Holocaust, the idea that great wickedness is not always perpetrated by monsters, but often by ordinary people who have normalized the abnormal, who have accepted the unacceptable as just the way things are, is afoot in this country. We are watching evil become boring, become routine, become so embedded in the daily news cycle that we risk losing our capacity to be shocked by it, and the only antidote, the only way to break the spell, is to stand up and say, with uncompromising clarity, that this is bad. Not that it is politically disadvantageous, not that it polls poorly, but that it is morally wrong in a way that transcends partisan calculation. The Congresswoman noted that this is what she appreciates about these conversations: the willingness to state the obvious truth that so many in power are too cowardly to utter, that killing unarmed citizens is evil, that lying about it afterward compounds the evil, and that silence in the face of it is complicity. The hearings in the House Judiciary Committee provided a stark and horrifying illustration of just how far the moral compass has been broken on one side of the aisle. Democrats had intended to use the session to discuss bail reform legislation, but the gravity of Renee Good's murder demanded that the conversation shift to the killing that had shocked the nation. What happened next was a window into a worldview so cold, so punitive, so utterly divorced from any recognizable concept of justice that it takes your breath away. Multiple Republicans sitting on that dais looked at the video evidence, processed the fact that an American woman was shot through a car window by a federal agent, and their takeaway was not horror or grief or a call for accountability. Their takeaway, spoken aloud and on the record, was a chilling threat dressed up as an observation. The video shows that if you do not comply, you will die. That was their message: compliance or death. Obey immediately and without question, or forfeit your existence. There was no curiosity about what due process requires. There was no acknowledgement that lethal force is supposed to be a last resort. There was simply the cold, authoritarian calculus that the state's command must be obeyed instantly, or the state's violence is justified. The Congresswoman pushed back with the question that should haunt every one of those Republicans into the next election cycle and beyond. She asked them, would you be saying that if this person was in your district, if this was one of your constituents, someone who attended the church where you worship, someone whose family you have shaken hands with at a town hall, would you still be sitting there calmly explaining that she deserved to die because she didn't comply fast enough? The answer is obvious. They would not. They would be screaming for an investigation, demanding answers, holding press conferences, expressing outrage, because the person would be real to them in a way that a stranger on a video is not. But the moral failure is precisely that distinction: the idea that rights and dignity are reserved for people you know and like, while strangers can be executed without a second thought. The Congresswoman drew a contrast so sharp, it cut through the hypocrisy like a scalpel. Nobody, not a single one of the Republicans who now preach the gospel of compliance or death, applied that standard to the January 6th insurrectionists. Think about what those individuals did. They stormed the seat of American democracy. They used bear spray on Capitol Police officers, blinding them with chemicals designed to incapacitate. They beat officers with flagpoles, with fire extinguishers, with fists. They bludgeoned law enforcement personnel in a sustained, violent attempt to overturn a democratic election. They did not comply with police orders. They resisted. They attacked. And what did they receive? They received the full majesty of due process. They were arrested, yes, but they were charged. They were given lawyers. They were tried in courts of law. They were sentenced by judges. They were incarcerated, but they were not executed on the spot. They were not shot through car windows. They were not labeled domestic terrorists and gunned down without warning. And then, after all of that constitutional process played out, they received something else that Renee Good will never receive. They received pardons from Donald Trump. The man who now insists that non-compliance justifies instant death pardoned hundreds of people who violently attacked police officers, and many of those pardoned individuals have gone on to commit additional crimes, demonstrating that the leniency they received was not a lesson learned, but a permission slip for further lawlessness. The duplicity, the hypocrisy, the moral rot of a system that processes violent insurrectionists through the courts, while allowing federal agents to act as judge, jury, and executioner on the streets against unarmed citizens, is so complete that it constitutes a fundamental breakdown in the very concept of equal justice under law. The question that inevitably follows this cascade of revelations is the most difficult one. Where do we go from here? What are the action steps? How do ordinary people, watching their country descend into paramilitary violence and moral chaos, channel their anger and their fear into something productive that can actually shift the trajectory? The landscape is admittedly overwhelming. The year has been a relentless barrage of assaults on the rule of law from every conceivable angle. There was the unlawful invasion of Venezuela, justified by Trump with a blunt admission that it was about oil, about seizing resources, about the kind of imperial plunder that the United States supposedly left behind in a previous century. The American people were told, in effect, that they would need to subsidize the takeover of a foreign nation's petroleum reserves to the tune of $100 billion, all while the beneficiaries are the same oil companies that have always profited from military adventurism. There have been ICE Gestapo-style invasions in cities like Minneapolis, where federal agents have murdered people in cold blood, acting with the impunity of an occupying force rather than the accountability of law enforcement. There has been a glimmer of congressional self-assertion, with some Republicans joining on a War Powers resolution and an Affordable Care Act subsidies extension, but the expectation is that Trump will simply block any such measures from actually taking effect, rendering the legislative branch a debating society rather than a co-equal power. There has been the ongoing cover-up around the Epstein files, a child sex trafficking scandal that reaches into the highest levels of power and that the administration has worked diligently to keep sealed. The cumulative weight of all of this on the minds of the American people is staggering, and the temptation to despair is real. But the Congresswoman's answer to the question of where we go from here was anchored in a single powerful concept. We have to keep doing what we are doing so that the fever breaks. This is not a permanent condition. This is an illness in the body politic. And illnesses can be cured if the treatment is sustained and the patient does not give up. She sees glimmers of hope, evidence that the pressure is working and that the fever is beginning to crack. The theft of oil from Venezuela, for instance, must be talked about not just in terms of its flagrant illegality under international law, but in terms of its utter failure to deliver anything of value to the American people. It is not as though the president stole 1,000 gas stations and the oil is now sitting at the pump ready to lower prices. The cost of gas is not going down. The cost of groceries is not going down. The cost of rent is not going down. In fact, the opposite is happening because more taxpayer dollars are being siphoned off to fund the continued ravaging, the continued raping and pillaging of Venezuela and any other country that ends up in the crosshairs. The imperial project enriches a tiny elite and bleeds everyone else dry, and pointing out that reality is how you break the spell that war is somehow good for the working class. The real source of hope, the tangible proof that sustained pressure produces results, is what happened over the summer with the Affordable Care Act. The administration wanted to let it die, to strip healthcare from millions, to balance the budget on the backs of the sick. But people took to the streets. People made noise. People refused to be silent. And that pressure produced a discharge petition, a procedural mechanism that forced a vote even against the will of leadership. And it attracted 4 Republicans willing to break ranks. Ultimately, 17 House Republicans crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats on health care, a number that would have been unthinkable in the early days of the administration. They know they are vulnerable. They know they are likely to lose the House in the midterms. They know the American people are angry and that the anger is directed at them. That same pressure is what compelled the Senate to vote on a War Powers resolution with Republican support. That same pressure is what forced the Senate to vote unanimously to install a plaque commemorating the January 6th officers, a symbolic but significant acknowledgement that the violence of that day cannot be memory hold. Every single time something insane happens, every time another norm is shattered, another citizen is murdered, another war is launched on false pretenses, the American people are pulling out the ledger. They are looking at the receipt. And the receipt from the administration's illegal and immoral actions is not showing a safer country. It is not showing a lower cost of living. It is not showing peace or moral clarity or any of the things that were promised. The receipt is a bill for chaos, for death, for corruption, and for decline. And the people are increasingly unwilling to keep paying it. That is how the fever breaks. That is how the moral reckoning arrives. And that is why voices like Sheriff Bilal's, voices like Congresswoman Kamlager-Dove's need to be amplified until they become a chorus so loud that even the most insulated bubble of power cannot ignore the sound of its own judgment.